So, how did you guys find that exercise? Was that harder or easier than the first one? Harder? Easier? All right. It kind of depends, I think, on where you are in your thinking and how much of this you've already kind of put in place or thought about. So, I think one of the really important pieces of this, and I was talking to Tony about this during this exercise, is thinking about the strengths and weaknesses of each participant. When you look at a group, and Tim, I use your example on physicians. Can I use that? So for his practice, one of the things he said, well, other physicians are a good candidate as a buyer for us. And then as we talk through what does that look like, there are variations on physicians. There are large practices with established brands. There are individuals who have their own practices and maybe struggling. There are individuals who have their own practices that are thriving. So physicians as a bucket isn't necessarily as descriptive because you're not going to find the specific person with that. So as we were talking and we were drilling down, who's going to value his business the most? And this kind of gets to this last column, and we're going to dive into the value piece in the next exercise. Is it someone, in his case, that has a practice that is thriving but doesn't have the ability to build a brand or to maybe market the business as well, and so his brand is really valuable to them, and that person coming in over time and being able to learn how to build that brand and continue to develop that brand may be the right person. And then how do you structure that transaction so that it's maybe a buyout over time versus a walk-in and give you the cash today? In professional services, you see that transition period much more commonly than you do with a business that has a lot of physical assets and inventory that is stuff that can be transferred over. So thinking at a more granular level in some cases about who these buyers are rather than a bucket, what are the key criteria? And we talked about strengths and weaknesses for Tony's example, and that, you know, who can afford to buy it? You know, who are the people out there who actually have the cash to participate? And that's going to drive some of the deal terms. If you're giving them equity, can you give them less salary? Do you have some sort of an earn-out process where they buy a little bit of a company every year for 10 years? Because you may not have someone who can come in with your $5 million number on day zero. Can that person sell? Are you bringing in someone who really is a rock that just can't get out there and bring the clients in? Well, that's not going to help this business, and it's not going to help it grow to the number that it needs in order for Tony to exit with the number he wants. So what are the different elements that you really need at a granular level to find this right buyer? I mentioned earlier something like the character, keeping the character of the business. Is this party able to do that or not? Is it important? So I wanted to get your sense for different strengths and weaknesses that came out, because I think it'll help the rest of the group to think about what they wrote down as well. So does someone have a buyer and a strength that made sense for your business? Greg?
Well, for me, I think I'm going to transition more into an arm's length ownership with my son, because he's worked there for a while. He's worked with me. He's worked close, you know, in the business during his college. And after he got out of college, it was much like another person said. He went off and did his own thing, worked for another company, was successful. Then he came back and said, "Okay, I want to be involved."
Good.
And so that's the direction I'm heading.
Okay. And the strengths of him being the buyer?
He's got experience in the business. He's earned the respect of the coworkers and the other employees. But the weakness he's got is that he doesn't have any money.
He's got the legacy. He just doesn't have the cash to pay you to fund your retirement.
But it's okay, because I don't need the cash to get out. I can be an arm's length owner, and as long as it's run properly, there'll be enough for myself and enough for him to live on.
So he might buy it over time.
Yeah, but see, he's got a brother also who wants to be involved desperately, but he's already got a successful career, and I don't have a position where I could bring him in and say, okay, I can make an offer to you, and you can come and be involved also. So I have to be real careful, because I want to somehow leave it to both of them.
Yeah, that's a very interesting.
And that's before you do, Tony, really great point, because I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 75% of the family-owned businesses that I work with, they do not differentiate between ownership and involvement in the business. And you and I can own stock in Microsoft, but we aren't going to tell Steve Ballmer what to do.
Right.
that issue, along with others that I'm listing here, are parts of the strength and weaknesses analysis you need to go to. So I encourage you to consider the adjectives you use whenever you talk about these things, because desperation, how you describe it, he desperately wants to get in somehow, is a clear red flag. And you need to explore what that desperation means, both to you and to him. He may not see this desperation. You need to think in terms of strengths and weaknesses. You know, what could this outside son actually provide to the company of value as possibly a board member? Sorry, didn't mean to waylay this, but it's a great example.
Well, and in this example, you know, your son doesn't have the financial ability to buy you out. However, did someone have a buyer, prospective buyer, that the money piece was the strength? It's the reason why you would consider them.
In my field, there are consolidators. I have an independent repair facility, but there's consolidators that are throughout the United States and Canada, that 4 or 5 key groups, and they're moving into states and picking up maybe 20 shops, buying power, but mostly they can court the insurance industry with far more strength, because they can, if an insurer decides to make just another cut in what they will pay for or change in how they do things, they just need to make one phone call. And that's a big seller versus dealing with independents, where you need to get the word out to all the shops. And here's what we're going to do now, and here's how we're going to do it. So that's something that is prevalent in our industry. And I've listed that here and talked about weaknesses too. And the weakness is that they won't pay what someone with an emotional attachment would pay for a 42-year-old business that has a key place in the community. So it's just going to be dollars and cents with that group, or with a business investor, because it could be a Boeing exec that's retiring and wants to run a business. I mean, we have those kinds of people get into our industry with no knowledge of the business, of the repair side, but looking for stable management, long-term management, so they can rely on that to help them with the shop side, but they see the numbers they like to see. In both cases, that emotional attachment, that, boy, you know, you've been there forever, everybody knows it's a good place to get your car repaired, yada, 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 I want my name on that door. Those dollars won't be paid by those 2 buyers.
It's a good analysis.
And it's a terrific way to start approaching it. So one of the things I would do in your shoes is go to one of the aggregators, one of the companies that's buying up companies, and say, what are your valuation criteria? And then, if you determine that you've got time to do it, in other words, it might be a 24-month window, you don't have time to do much with your company, but let's say it's 5 years. So in 5 years, if you hit a certain dollar revenue amount, or a certain percentage of net profit, or some other ratios, you can actually accrue more money from them. It may be worth it to do that. You may also decide, though, I'm going to find an emotional buyer. And there are people like John Martinka, who's a business broker, Peter Busaka, and others in town who, depending on your industry, can help you with those. You know, I usually sit down with about 5 people a year who talk to me about leaving the most recent example, I was talking with somebody during the break. Guy who was a senior executive at Skype, MSN bought Skype, is now getting ready to leave. He's looking for businesses. So he sat down with me to find those. The sourcing of those requires a network effort. It requires, he doesn't care what industry it is. One quick other aside.
Okay, we're getting short.
Every buyer of your company, every potential buyer, thinks they are smarter than you and will be able to do something you haven't been able to do in the company as you qualify them. If you are not getting cash, which most of you won't, you're gonna get cash in terms. You better know what that smartness is and what the likelihood you believe is that they will be able to do that.